Sitting in a cardboard box that once held a refrigerator was not the best way to spend a cloudy morning in LA. There I was, hanging out on a fire escape outside an empty room at the Roslyn Hotel. The box hid me perfectly while I kept an eye on the back door of the hotel kitchen across the little road between the hotel wings. The hotel had me on door duty because it looked like pricey cuts of meat were sneaking out of the cooler, way more were disappearing than they were serving up. Hotels really don't like losing money like that. Denny Searle, the food services manager at the hotel, was my go-to person. He set up the empty room behind the cardboard box. Searle and I just didn't click from the very start. He wanted to look like a manager in his fancy Hartschaffner Marx suit, but his jowls, messy tie, and droopy belly screamed food services. He clearly thought I was just a snoopy person getting paid too much. To me, he was just a whole lot of trouble stuffed into a tiny space. After he tried to show me how to do my job for the third time, I really wanted to tell him off, but the hotel was paying me well enough to just deal with it. It was my second day in the box. Everything was pretty normal the day before. I was happy that the room behind me was empty. I could sneak in through the window every few hours to dump out the coffee can I was using to toss the coffee and Coke I drank to keep myself awake, and grab a few puffs of a Lucky. Getting up and moving around really seemed to ease the bellyache that kicked in last night. It's super hard to explain the daily thrill of being a private investigator. I had a pre-war Leica hanging around my neck, ready to capture anything cool I might see. I didn't have the cash for a fancy camera, but the client who said he couldn't pay me for catching his wife in bed with her boss was eager to hand over the Leica when I shared all the reasons my little collection agency was doing so well. A bit before 10 o'clock, an old Ford pickup with two guys inside rolled up to the kitchen's back door and honked twice. A minute later, the door swung open and a guy in chef's white stepped out, balancing a big chunk of meat under each arm. Later learned it was 2 whole prime ribs. He turned and strolled down the steps to the pickup when a milk truck zipped into the alleyway. I grabbed the Leica to start snapping photos and saw everything unfold right through the viewfinder. The cook and the milk truck arrived at the pickup almost together. The milk truck pulled over right after the pickup, and 2 guys in not-so-fancy suits hopped out. They all had a sawed-off shotgun with them. They fired so quickly it was like they were slam-firing. They shot 2 rounds at the cook and 4 at the pickup, then hopped back into the milk truck and sped away. 6 shots. They must have been total newbies, they didn't even bother to take the plugs out. I stuffed the Leica in my jacket pocket and dashed down the fire escape to the truck. 6 rounds of double-aught buck at that distance were more than enough. It was tough to figure out the prime rib from what was left of the cook. The pickup cab was packed with bloody bits and pieces. I snapped a few more photos, then headed into the kitchen to give Lieutenant Dan Wilkes at LAPD a call. Searle burst into the kitchen while I was on the phone. "What just happened out there? I thought I heard gunshots." "No way, Sherlock, those weren't backfires. Your cook and a few of his pals got turned into hamburger while he was trying to hand them some chunks of beef." Just then, someone picked up the phone at the cop shop right as Searle was about to say more. I raised my hand to signal him to hush. He wasn't a fan of that, but I was totally fine with it. "Hey, it's Pete Spector here. I'm a private investigator. There's been a shooting at the Roslyn Hotel, and 3 guys are dead. I need to talk to Lieutenant Dan Wilkes." I had to chat with the desk sergeant or whoever answered the phone for a few minutes before they finally connected me to Wilkes. I really needed him on the line, not just any officer, because we had a past together. Wilkes understood that I was just there to watch, and I knew he could easily get the truth from me without any pressure. As soon as Wilkes picked up, I hardly had a chance to speak before Searle lost his cool. "I'm not worried about Burge or his crew. He's as clear as day, but he's a fantastic line cook, so I keep him on. Let the cops figure out who took those guys out, but we don't need you here anymore. Now, hand over the phone." When he reached for the phone, I quickly pushed his hand down onto the shiny counter and hit the back with the handset as hard as I could. I loved doing it so much that I hit it again and heard some bones crack. He let out a loud screech and squeal like a pig stuck by its leg. "Hang tight for a sec, Wilkes. I just need to handle something quick." I didn't even think to cover the phone. "Next time you reach for something of mine, Mac, I'll break your arm." Maybe even both. Think twice and go somewhere else until I'm done chatting with the cops. Or do you want to see me get really mad? He glared at me for a moment, then stomped off, grumbling and cradling his messed up hand. I had a foe, but it didn't bother me at all. Hey, Wilkes. We've got a bit of a mess at the Roslyn. 3 guys got hit with double-aught buck. No need for an ambulance, just send the meat wagon and some gunny sacks. I filled him in on how I was hired to keep an eye on the kitchen back door, where I was watching, and how the shooting went down. He only asked me to slow down once so he could jot down some notes while I was talking. That and a few cheeky comments about how I must have spent my time in the refrigerator box. I told him to take a hike, my hands are clean. You know the routine, Spectre. Hang tight until I arrive with the crime scene crew and the me. He appeared with his usual chewed up, unlit cigar stuck in the corner of his mouth. I went over the scenario again, this time using some visuals to help out. When we were done, I rolled the film back into the cassette and handed it to him. Those will give you a decent idea of what happened, but don't expect too much help from them. It had to be a stolen milk truck. I was a good 100 feet away and didn't have a telephoto lens, so their faces will be pretty tiny. Wilkes was still excited to take the film and promised to give me a set of prints and identify the dead cook as soon as he could. He didn't even think to say, "Don't leave town." I just didn't want to head to the office after that. No need to tell anyone, I didn't have a full-time secretary. My first one took off last year after a couple of East Coast mobsters came into my office and tried to grab her and her daughter, planning something really terrible. The 2 mugs were taken out by some rival mobsters who vanished without a trace. I felt let down, but it didn't really shock me when she took off a few days later to who knows where. I headed back to my apartment instead. I jumped at the chance to leave my old one-room dump as soon as I could afford it. The new place wasn't just a section of a big house turned into apartments, it was in a genuine apartment building. The entryway didn't smell like old urine and cigars, it had a light scent of pine sol instead. The carpet on the stairs was a bit old but still in good shape, and just one light bulb was out. Overall, it's a top-notch place. My ground floor apartment had double the rooms of the old place, 2 plus its own bathroom with a toilet that usually worked and a shower. The bedroom was cozy, and the kitchenette had a counter with a sink and some cabinets. There was space for a working stove and fridge, plus a little table with 2 chairs. I made myself a yummy grilled cheese sandwich and some tomato soup. My cooking skills are pretty basic and enjoyed it with a Nehi orange. I pushed away the thought of how great a beer would have been, then settled in for a nap. I woke up after 3 o'clock. I stepped into the hall and fished out a copy of yesterday's Times from a trash can. I spent the whole afternoon reading it and tackling the crossword puzzle. My tummy was hurting again, so I just didn't want to eat anything. I checked the obituaries again to see if my name was there, then headed off to bed. Just down the street from my new place, there was a diner and a dry cleaner instead of a pawn shop and a brothel. I snatched a fast breakfast at the diner and then zoomed off to my office. I had the same 3 rooms, plus the little bathroom ever since I started my business. I found enough paying clients since then to swap out the old, broken furniture from the sidewalk with some pretty nice used pieces from real furniture stores. The secretary's chair in the front office was nearly the same as the desk. 2 guest chairs without any rips were lined up against the wall by the outside door, and the coffee pot was so easy to use that I could make a tasty cup myself. The window was a bit grimy, but it had nice, real curtains. The inner office still had my old desk, but I had spruced it up and cleaned it so it looked pretty good. 2 cozy guest chairs were placed in front, a nice couch leaned against one wall, and a few pictures of Yosemite and Death Valley brightened up the plain walls. The card table and folding chairs I used to call my conference table were gone since I never used them. The coffee table in front of the couch was real wood and looked great after a good polish. The place had the vibe of an office belonging to someone who was doing pretty well. I didn't always have to have someone in the office, but when I did, I brought in temps from Kelly Girl. Just as I settled into my chair with my feet up on the desk, ready to enjoy a fresh pot of coffee and dive into the morning Times, the phone rang. I stumbled forward and thumped my feet on the floor. Wow! If I had called for a secretary, she could have'n. Swirred the phone. Spectre Investigations, this is Pete Spectre. A cheerful young lady with a lovely voice was on the other end. "Hey there, Mr. Spector." "Good morning." "Hey there. It's Kathy from the Roslyn Hotel." "Hey. If you swing by today, the desk clerk will have an envelope ready for you with your check inside. Come join us for a free meal at our coffee shop." I thanked her and said I just had breakfast, so I'd likely swing by around noon to grab that free lunch they offered. I settled back into my comfy spot with my feet on the desk and enjoyed reading the Times without any more interruptions. So, no business, but hey, at least I'd get paid to watch three guys get turned into chopped liver. I zipped over to Roslyn, grabbed my check at the front desk, and treated myself to a tasty steak sandwich on the house at the coffee shop. Right when I was getting ready to head out, someone came over to my booth. "Mr. Spector?" I gave a nod. "Mr. Wolfson, the hotel manager, wants to chat with you in his office, if you're free." They paid right on time and generously for a few days of work, so I said yes. The guy took me behind the check-in counter, down a hallway to a private elevator, and then up 3 floors to a bright corner office that overlooked West 5th. Sitting behind a desk that made mine look tiny, Mr. Wolfson clearly did well for himself. He got up and strolled around the desk to give me a handshake. Thank goodness. There's nothing worse than picking up a dead fish with fingernails. "Thanks for coming on such short notice, Mr. Spector. Please, take a seat. Can I get you something to drink?" I told him no thanks. I just enjoyed a really nice lunch that didn't cost me a thing, just a tip for the awesome service. The server who helped me really did an awesome job. It was a bonus that she was attractive and had a knack for charming people for tips. Let's dive in, Mr. Spector. I know you saw the chaos outside the kitchen yesterday, and we still don't know who did it. I've caught wind of some talk that the Longshoremen's Union might be involved. Have you heard anything like that? I had no idea about that. Wilkes still hadn't called to identify the dead cook, so I didn't get a chance to ask him what he found out. He didn't need to say a word, but sometimes we'd share updates about cases we both found interesting. Nope, I haven't heard anything about that. But hey, it's not out of the question. Wolfson leaned in, his voice getting tougher. That union is packed with communists, Mr. Spector. Chinese communists took my brother's life, along with many other brave American boys, in Korea. If the union is to blame, I want them to face the music. I chose to tell him that I was on the same page. He might be considering paying me to find out, and he paid really well. I've heard things about the communists and the dockworkers union. The Chicoms really tried to take me out in Korea, Mr. Wolfson, and they took way too many of my friends. But I took out a lot more of them. He relaxed, put his fingers together, and pondered for a moment. Hey Mr. Spector, could you check if those rumors are true? I'd need you to focus on this completely, not just squeeze it in with other work. I understand you'd have to charge a bit more for this special deal. This is getting exciting. I didn't have much else going on, so taking his full-time job wouldn't mean losing any work, at least not at first. Just when I was about to figure out how much to raise my rates, he snatched the opportunity right out of my hands. I can offer you $150 a day, and you'd be on call whenever needed, plus any expenses you might have. Does that sound good to you? Is that something I'd like? That was double what I usually charge. I really tried hard not to show how much it excited me. It totally made my day, maybe even my whole month. I put on my best business smile, but I thought I should check if he was really serious. I believe we can figure something out, Mr. Wolfson, but the police are already on the case. Why do you think I can do a better job? I trust you'll do a good job, which is more than I can say for the Los Angeles Police Department. The labor unions have way too much power and influence in this city. I doubt they would support a real investigation into any union ties to those murders. He really seemed to mean what he said, so I thought it was a good idea to ask for a week in advance. What I usually do. He was so far in front of me. He pulled out a checkbook from the desk and began to write. This should take care of the first 2 weeks. If you sort it out before that, think of it as a nice little bonus for a job well done. He handed me the check with a cheeky grin, like he knew all about my usual rate and how I like to get paid up front. No need to check in with me every day, Mr. Spectre. Just give me a shout when you find something that needs my attention. I trust your judgment on that. He grabbed a business card from a holder on his desk and placed it in front of me. You can always reach me at this number. He got up, letting everyone know the meeting was done. I grabbed his card, tucked it and the check into my jacket pocket, and waited to be let out. In my office, I set up the answering service to take calls all day and night. I won't need a secretary for the next few weeks. Right when I wrapped things up, the phone started ringing. It was Lieutenant Wilkes. You asked for an ID on the dead butcher. Meet Albert Burge, 42 years young, with a clean record. He lives in an apartment with a guy named Thomas Albright, who is 48 years old. No phone, or at least no number you can find. Do you have an address? I got a spot in a tough area of East LA. It was past 4 o'clock, but I thought I'd take a shot that Albright would be around and ready to chat a bit. I had no clue what a line cook at the Roslyn made, but looking at the apartment building, it couldn't have been a lot. The place was so beat up it would have taken ages and a bunch of cash just to get to falling apart. As I made my way to the second floor, I looked out for red tags until I spotted apartment 2C. I knocked, waited, knocked again, and was just about to head out when the door slowly opened. I caught a glimpse of a face, just a nose and mouth really, but the guy inside stayed quiet. Hey there. I'm Peter Spectre, and I work as a private investigator. I'm here to chat with Mr. Thomas Albright. Can I come in? He thought for a bit, then swung the door open and strolled back in without saying anything. I went in and shut the door behind me. The living room was a bit worn out but super tidy. There was just an old couch and a chair for furniture. The empty window faced a close brick wall, and a lone light bulb hung from the ceiling. A light, flowery smell filled the air. Thomas Albright was a small guy, about 5 feet 6 inches, with a thin face, thinning hair, and a scruffy goatee. He sat in the chair, so I plopped down on the couch. We spent a long moment just looking at each other. Not wanting to play a staring game, I asked him how long he'd known Burge. That did the trick. He started crying, and when he finally talked, his voice was almost lost in his tears. My whole life. Now it's all done. Searle's earlier comment about Burge really struck a chord. Suddenly, an uncomfortable memory from my past popped back into my mind. Almost 20 years ago, when we were still in Brownsville, my cousin Jacob got arrested for solicitation by an undercover cop in Brooklyn. The officer approached Jacob first in the restroom at Lincoln Terrace Park, but it didn't really matter to the Brooklyn PD who started it. Jacob was charged just to have something on record, but nothing came of it after that. Aunt Sophie was teaching me piano when a cop showed up with Jacob after he spent the night in jail. The cop stood in the hallway of their third-floor walk-up and explained to Uncle Ben what happened. Aunt Sophie and I rushed to the door when we heard the yelling, and before long, we were all in the hall. After the cop left, Uncle Ben slapped Jacob and shouted, "You're no son of mine. Leave right now and don't ever return." Aunt Sophie tried to cool things off, but Uncle Ben just kept yelling his anger until Jacob took off. Uncle Ben shoved Aunt Sophie back inside the apartment and banged the door shut. I chased after Jacob as he dashed to the back stairs and raced up 2 more flights to the roof. When we reached the rooftop door, I stopped in my tracks and saw Jacob dash to the edge. He turned to me and shouted, "Tell Ma I'm sorry and I love her." Then he leaped. The roof of a streetcar cushioned his fall just enough for the ambulance crew to scoop him up and rush him to Brooklyn Hospital. Aunt Sophie and my parents kept taking turns in his room, not wanting to leave even when the nurses and orderlies said they might call the police. I visited whenever I could sneak away from school and my job delivering the Daily Eagle. Jacob passed away 2 days later without ever waking up. Uncle Ben never came into his room. Aunt Sophie moved in with us and divorced him, but getting a divorce in New York back then was tough. It took nearly 3 years, plus another 4 years to deal with the greedy lawyers. By then, we had moved to Gowanus. My dad said it was to escape the bad memories, but I could see that the neighborhood was different. Crime was on the rise, and sometimes it felt unsafe for Jews. It took a really long time for my bad dreams to go away. Even now, I can close my eyes and hear him yell, "Tell Ma I'm sorry and I love her," and see him leap. My dad never talked to his brother Ben again. Albright gathered his feelings and finally said, "Why do you want to know? What does it matter?" I wondered about that too, and had to face the fact that it really didn't matter at all. "You got it, Mr. Albright, it really doesn't matter." "Do you know if he had any enemies?" He didn't say a word, just shot me a look that screamed, "Come on, Mr. Spector, you know better. You realize that at least 1 million folks in LA believe the only good queer is a dead queer." I was just wasting my time and making him even more unhappy. I tried to get myself out of trouble. "Sorry I made you upset, Mr. Albright. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Spector, but that won't bring Elle back. But I really hope you find them." I never saw Albright again. I really hope he's doing alright. I really wanted a drink after seeing Albright. Since I was still off the booze, I decided to check out Laverne's new spot instead. Bernie's shut down right after New Year's, so Laverne had to find a new gig. She ended up working at a place called the Rusty Scupper on North Main in Lincoln Heights. Last year, as we were getting to know each other, she playfully called herself Laverne Porter from the Pacoima Porters. Of course, she wasn't really from Pacoima, who is in Southern California, right? People moved here before and during the war, some for the fruit and nut orchards, others for the shipyards and aircraft factories. They never looked back. Laverne was just like me, an East Coaster. I hailed from Brooklyn, while she was from Weehawken, right across the river from Hell's Kitchen and the Lincoln Tunnel. Before I could even place my order, she whipped up my first Fonatini, which was her fun name for the fake martini she made. She'd shake up some water with a few ice cubes, then pour it through a strainer into a martini glass and pop in a couple of olives. You couldn't tell the difference from the real deal until you took a sip. As I casually looked around at the customers, I nibbled on olives and sipped my drink like it was the best gin ever. Out of nowhere, I doubled over and let out a yelp when a sharp pain shot through my stomach, like someone had jabbed me with a knife. The bellyache I'd been feeling for a couple of days was nothing compared to this. Laverne quickly rushed over to the bar and asked if there was a problem with my drink. I shook my head, but she could see that something was off. Without waiting for me to say anything, she picked up the phone and called for an ambulance. I wanted to protest, but it hurt too much to speak or even move my arms. It took some time for the ambulance to arrive. I managed to get off the bar stool and lie down on the floor, which felt a bit better, but I was shaking with chills and worried I might throw up. I don't remember much about getting onto the gurney and into the ambulance, but I hear I was shouting some pretty rude stuff about their moms, their medical skills, and just how they were as people. They brought me to LA County, where they quickly found out I had a ruptured appendix and rushed me into emergency surgery. When I woke up in the recovery room, I instantly fell for the kind nurse in white who told me the operation went well and that everything would be all right. I had no clue what she meant, I just wanted her to keep holding my hand and chatting with me. The next time I opened my eyes, she had a 5 o'clock shadow and looked like a tired guy who'd been awake all night. "You're a lucky guy, Mr. Spector. We took out your appendix and made sure everything was clear before anything bad could happen." I kind of nodded like I got it and then drifted back to sleep. I really wish they wouldn't keep this wing so chilly. A different nurse was busying herself, tucking in my so-called blanket and fixing the tubes sticking out of my arms and belly. She wasn't the same angel I had fallen for earlier, but she was another stunner. I couldn't help but think if the hospital needed some help with interviewing nurse applicants. I totally understood her gripe about the cold. I hadn't felt warm at all since I was shivering on the bar floor. She handed me some pills, turned down the lights, and said that if I went to sleep soon, I'd start feeling better faster. But I wasn't sure I could drift off when I felt this chilly. BRRR. It's freezing. Wow, I've never felt this chilly before. Cal joined the Corps to speed up his path to U.S. citizenship. Then Korea came along. He wasn't too keen on my complaints, he'd heard it all before. After Samoa and San Diego, he thought anything below 80 was freezing. I reminded him that back in '34 it was 13 below in Brooklyn, so to him, I had no right to moan about 30 or 35 below. We were watching the back door of our retreat from Chosin Reservoir. There wasn't enough time to set up the Madus properly, and the ground had been frozen for over a month, so digging tools didn't do much good. We got creative, scraping up dirt and gravel to fill some sandbags and stacking bigger rocks. We found a spot on the military crest, as high as we could go on the hill without being seen. We were running low on ammo, so Cal made a few trips over the hill to Battalion HQ. He brought back half a dozen cans and the latest news and rumors. We're gonna pull back a few miles sometime tomorrow and set up on another one of these hills. I told them we needed a brand new team to handle all this stuff since our guys got moved around. They said they'd handle it, but I'll believe it when I see it. Cal wasn't too sure about those rear echelon folks, even if they were Marines. He had more news to share. Those poor pups on the east side of the lake really got hit hard. They joked that it seemed like half the Chink army was coming at them. He piled up the ammo, then dug into his parka and tossed me a box of sea rations. Here's dinner. Maybe breakfast, as well. Chow it down quick before it turns into ice. The other Madus was about 200 yards to our west. We had 3.30 caliber M1919s set up with overlapping fields of fire 100 yards below us. The .50s could reach out a good 1,000 yards farther than the .30s. The smaller guns handled the Chikoms we didn't hit. We were making things tough and often quick for the guys trying to stop us from getting to Hungnam. The higher-ups thought Hungnam would be our Dunkirk, a place where we could escape from a huge number of Chikoms. Those poor guys had it rough with the cold, even worse than us. We discovered many of them dead in their foxholes, with no injuries, just starved or frozen, or both. Even though we were outnumbered, it felt pretty humiliating to retreat. We were Marines, for crying out loud. Not long after Cal returned with the ammo, the sky started to darken and chaos erupted. A few mortar rounds came up the hill, and a lucky shot knocked out the other Madus before we could strike back. Cal was up and sprinting before I could even react. He came back a few minutes later, lugging 3 more cans of ammo and shaking his head. Nobody left. He didn't say more, just linked a couple of belts together. As soon as he settled in, the bugles blared, signaling the first attack of the night. I began shooting quick bursts at the dark shapes creeping up the hill. They usually came in groups of 75 or 100, but this time it seemed like there were several hundred, with another wave not far behind. I kept shooting in quick bursts but then picked up the speed, worrying about the barrel getting too hot. The .30s below us were zipping back and forth, firing almost non-stop as the Chikoms moved in closer. I began firing longer bursts. We had set the tripod in a way that I couldn't aim low enough to hit the .30 cruise, so as the Chikoms got nearer to the .30s, it became trickier for me to aim at them. Then I ran out of ammo. I turned to shout at Cal. What the heck? He was lying on his side, with a gap where his left eye used to be. I didn't have time to check if he was really gone. I needed to reload the Madus. Just as I pulled the charging lever, 2 Corsairs zoomed low over the hill and dropped 4 tanks of napalm. The huge fireball halted the Chikom attack right away. It also burned up 2 of the 3.30 crews. I barely had a moment to process their death. I thought Cal's parka would fit over mine since it was getting colder by the second. I hurriedly worked to get his parka off his heavy body, which was already stiff. I considered grabbing his wool sweater, but it felt like it was 20 below, and I didn't want to take off my own parka just to put on the sweater. I got his parka on over mine and wrapped his wool scarf around my hat, covering my chin and ears. I wasn't super warm, but the extra layers and some movement helped a bit. Unfortunately, my good vibes didn't stick around. In the soft glow of the stars, I spotted something moving down the hill. I couldn't believe my eyes. The fallen Chikoms were rising, blood splattered on their jackets, and they were heading back up the hill. I pulled back the charging handle again to be sure, firing longer bursts, but they just kept getting back up. They were getting closer and closer. Then Kel took my hand and said, "You took my coat. I'm going to be so cold. Don't freeze up, or it's game over." I yanked my hand back and shot another burst, but he grabbed it again. "Hey! You grabbed my coat. I really thought you were my buddy. You were totally gone." I pulled my hand back again. "You were already gone." He reached for me again, but this time he placed his hand on my forehead instead of taking mine. It felt warm. Mr. Spectre. Hey, Mr. Spectre. Hey there, Mr. Spectre. Time to wake up. The nurse's hand felt cool, not warm. Wow, that must have been a really bad dream. You kept shouting, you were already dead. I was breathing hard like a horse that just sprinted at Santa Anita. Not ready to speak yet, I just nodded and pointed to the glass of water on the bedside table. She placed the bent straw in my mouth. I couldn't recall the last time something tasted so amazing, or a doll that looked so sweet. Then I thought of the angel in the recovery room. Maybe my mind was starting to wake up again. Thank you. My voice felt like a mix of Bugs Bunny and Foghorn Leghorn, but she smiled at me, so I guess she thought I sounded good. I'm S. Oh, happy you're feeling better, Mr. Spectre. I felt a bit anxious when you kept repeating, you were already dead. I didn't want to wear out my voice by admitting I was worried, so I just nodded and tried to smile. I think I ended up drooling instead. Wilkes arrived a few hours later. He didn't have any flowers, just the morning times. Did you find another way to get your customers to pay while you take a break, Spectre? Awesome racket you've got here. I wonder how much rest you'd get if your appendix blew up, Wilkes. It felt great to be back in my comfort zone, throwing playful jabs at him. The nurse figured out we weren't taking it seriously. It didn't explode, Mr. Spectre, it ruptured. If you really want to keep sharing unofficial updates about how you're doing, you should use the right words. She nearly held back a laugh. Wilkes and I both burst out laughing, but I quickly wished I hadn't. My stomach was already sore, and laughing made it feel like a million times worse. I didn't even want to imagine how bad it would be to cough or sneeze. We got comfortable, and the nurse went off to see some other patients. Wilkes recognized the two bodies in the pickup, a pair of small-time troublemakers. After tossing around a few more jabs, he told me to call him if I needed anything. The nurse returned, so I didn't get to ask him what he meant by anything before he took off. They sent me home a few days later after making sure someone would be there to help me out for the first week. Since Laverne had been hanging out in my room whenever she could, they were totally cool with her moving in with me for at least a week. And she did. Kind of. I didn't really plan on taking a whole week off. On the first day I was home, I called Wolfson to fill him in on what happened. He said not to stress about it, but I couldn't help it. There were just too many questions left hanging. After 4 days of being told to rest, I finally got dressed and headed to my office, even though Laverne was really against it. The elevator was broken, so I had to take the stairs. It was just one floor, but by the time I reached my office, I felt like I'd hiked up a mountain. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee with my new skills and settled at my desk with the Times. Just as I finished the first page, the phone rang. I picked it up, ready to tackle whatever came my way. Good morning, Mr. Spectre. It's Clarence Wolfson here. How are you doing? I can't believe you're already back in the office. I'm not just sitting here wishing my belly didn't hurt, Mr. Wolfson. Actually, it doesn't sting as much now, and I was feeling a bit bored. If you're feeling better, I want you to check out something at the Long Beach port for me. I've heard that something exciting might go down tonight. Where would you hear something like that, Mr. Wolfson? I really didn't expect him to spill the beans, but I was super curious about where he got his info. It makes me uneasy when a client seems to know more than I do and keeps it a secret. I can't share my sources, Mr. Spectre, but I trust them a lot. Maybe you should head home and get some rest for a night of watching. Just to be clear, it's all about observation. I'm not asking you to do anything more than keep an eye out for any interesting details. Feel free to call me anytime if you spot something cool, no matter the hour. He told me exactly what he wanted me to do and where to go at the waterfront. I took his advice and headed home. Laverne smartly didn't stick around after I brushed off her concerns. I toasted an English muffin, enjoyed a glass of milk with it, and then hit the hay. Late that night, I cruised down to the Long Beach port, parked behind a shadowy warehouse, and strolled toward the water. By midnight, I was on a wharf, sitting on a piece of fairly clean cardboard next to a dumpster, leaning against a post. I was keeping an eye on 8 big trucks that Wolfson mentioned were packed with frozen sides of Argentine beef headed for markets from LA to Bakersfield. The trailers were parked at an angle, leaving a space of about 15 feet to the edge of the wharf. The drivers clearly wanted to avoid any mishaps by backing one into the water. The only noise around was the hum of the refrigeration units on each trailer and the rare sound of a delivery truck passing by. I was feeling all cramped and sore from sitting too long, but I didn't want to take a pain pill and end up dozing off. I couldn't smoke, of course, but I had a thermos of coffee and could sneak over to the edge to relieve myself in the harbor. It felt great to stretch out those cramps. Just after 2 o'clock, things started to get exciting. A delivery truck rolled up to the gap on the far side, its lights off. It came to a stop by the first trailer, and someone hopped out. He swung open a door on the side of the truck, secured it, then strolled over to the trailer, popped the padlock, and swung the door wide open. While he was busy, another guy hopped out of the truck and pulled a ramp out from the side door. As soon as the trailer door swung open, he lifted the ramp and slid it right inside. Both guys hopped up on the ramp, dashed into the trailer, and quickly came back carrying a side of beef. They slid it down the ramp into the truck, went back inside the trailer, and lifted another side onto the ramp and into the truck. With their sneaky job done, they jumped down, slid the ramp back into the truck, and locked up the trailer. The truck zipped from one trailer to another, grabbing sides of beef along the way. In under 10 minutes, they loaded up 13 sides of beef, shut the side door, and sped off. It was a smooth operation. They had put butcher paper over the sign on the side of the truck, but one side had come loose. I could see Stagnaro Brothers. I spotted Meats and Seafood and Hawthorne, but the street address was still hidden. I grabbed my notebook and jotted that down along with the license number. 15 minutes after the truck zoomed away, I hurried back to my car. It was past 3 o'clock when I finally got home, but I called Wolfson like he asked and shared the name on the truck and the license plate number. He let out a big yawn and told me to relax in bed for the rest of the day. I settled for staying cozy until 9 o'clock. I thought it was important to check in with Wolfson and Albright about whether the Longshoremen's Union had any connection to the Roslyn massacre. I decided the smartest move would be to talk to their leader, a guy named Harry Bridges. He was based in San Francisco but would come down to Long Beach once or twice a month to keep an eye on things. By early afternoon, I figured out his routine. He always stayed in the same apartment in Long Beach, not fancy, but who needs fancy for just a few nights a month? There was only one bodyguard, who went into the apartment a bit before Bridges arrived. The driver from the train station just dropped him off at the curb. He stuck to his routine like clockwork, which helped him remember everything but was a total disaster for security. To make it even simpler for folks like me, his trips were shared in the local union newsletter the day before. A quick peek revealed that, as luck would have it, he was set to arrive in Long Beach just after 5 o'clock. I arrived at his apartment about an hour before the bodyguard was supposed to show up. The lock was pretty basic, and it took me just half a minute to get inside. I hung out in the bedroom, waiting for the bodyguard. When he finally came in, he took off his jacket and tossed it on the couch, then headed to the kitchen for a glass of water. I snuck up behind him at the sink, pressed the .45 against his left ear, and put him in a chokehold. I'd really prefer not to make a mess in Mr. Bridges' lovely kitchen, so why don't you slowly take the gun out just with your thumb and finger and place it on the counter? He stiffened, like he was considering making a run for it, so I pressed the .45 harder into his side and tightened my hold on his neck. Don't even think about it, Mac, unless you're super keen on collecting that life insurance. He carefully pulled the .38 from his shoulder holster and set it down on the counter. Awesome. All right, let's go to the bedroom and wait for your boss. I slipped his revolver into my pocket, kept the .45 aimed at him, and led him to the bedroom, positioning the door so I could still see the living room. What do you need with Bridges? He doesn't have any cash on him. I'm not after cash, just some info. We have fun, and everyone stays safe. Shoo. And don't even think about giving him a heads up. Believe me, you really don't want to give it a shot. He was as quiet as a preacher in a tricky spot. Bridges arrived about 30 minutes later, just on time. His suit seemed like it was worth more than my paycheck from the last few months. With his widow's peak and tight face, plus a grumpy look, he kind of reminded me of Jimmy Stewart, but only if Jimmy was having a really rough day. I hung back until he set down his suitcase and began to take off his jacket. He didn't seem to have any weapons, so I kicked the bedroom door open and pushed the goon across the room. While Bridges was busy with his bodyguard, I popped the magazine out of the .45 and tucked it into my pocket. Bridges finally spoke up. "Who in the world are you?" "I'm that troublemaker from Melbourne your mum didn't want you hanging out with back in Kensington." Hearing about his old neighborhood caught him off guard. His eyes got big, and his mouth dropped open, making him look like a fish gasping for air on a dock. He shut his mouth, attempted to speak, but then turned to the bodyguard and pointed a finger at me. "How did you let this?" "Take it easy, Bridges. This whole routine is all about you, not him. Let everyone know about your trip in the Union newsletter. Stay in the same apartment and get here just before 5:30. Why hire professional bodyguards when why? Oh, you can just get a union member to take care of it? Just one, but you really need at least 3. Plus, he's got a gun but no training to back it up. You really make someone feel special." I pulled out the goon's .38 from my pocket, flipped the cylinder open, and let the bullet spill onto the floor. After snapping the cylinder back in, I tossed it into the kitchen with a loud clatter that made both of them jump. To lighten the mood, I flipped the .45 around to show it was empty. See? It wasn't even loaded. I couldn't have done anything even if I wanted to. When the goon shook his head in frustration, I tried to cheer him up. "Don't worry about it too much." I pulled a full magazine from my pocket, popped it into the .45, and loaded a round into the chamber. After putting on the safety and tucking it under my left arm, I gestured for Bridges to sit on the couch. "Relax a bit. I came to chat, not fight." Without waiting for an answer, I told the bodyguard to head back to the bedroom and shut the door. He glanced at his boss. Bridges gave a nod, and he did as I asked. Bridges wasn't a fan of taking orders, but I had the only loaded gun here. He plopped down in his seat. Still, he wasn't going to act all soft about it. "So, who the heck are you and what do you want? I heard that someone in your union took out those 3 guys behind the Roslyn Hotel a few days back. Is there anything to that? I have no idea what you're saying, so you better leave while you still can." His words said one thing, but his eyes told a different story. The problem was, I couldn't tell if he was lying about the union members being involved in the shooting or if he just really didn't know anything about it. "Hey, Bridges, don't forget. I've got the gun, and you're just the jerk trying to pull a fast one. Let me jog your memory." I quickly recapped the shooting and then added a little flair about how many times I heard those ILWU members were the ones pulling the triggers. He thought for a moment, then shrugged. "Yeah, I think I heard something about that. But you hear a ton of stuff, and most of it isn't real. You still haven't shared who you are." "I'm a detective. I've got something to share that I didn't catch anywhere else. I saw it the night before last." I filled him in on the beef heist. He didn't just shrug this time, he was curious, maybe really curious. "Come on, Seamus, you noticed more than that. You're not letting loose. How much beef do we have? Got any guesses about who those 2 might be? What's the license plate on the truck? You're a detective, you didn't just sit around doing nothing. How about we strike a deal and swap some info?" I had to figure out how much to share with him, and if he'd actually want to play show me yours and I'll show you mine. I'm not too sure I can trust a guy named Alfred who goes by Harry. You left school and set sail at 16, even though your parents weren't on board with it. You say you used a mandolin to stay afloat when one of your ships went down. You were a wobbly, Congress called you a commie, but somehow the Supreme Court stepped in to save you. Hey, Seamus. How do you know so much about me? I really don't appreciate it when people poke around in my family's business. Chill out, Bridges. The only place I did any digging was the LA Public Library. You'd be amazed at how much you can find out if you flirt a little with the research librarian and treat her like a total knockout. He gave his head a little shake. Nah, I don't believe that. Those girls aren't silly. She probably wasn't the prettiest and knew it, so. No big deal, Bridges. You're spot on, she was just an ordinary girl, but she really wanted to think I was serious. I even got her a rose while she was on her lunch break. She acted like I had given her the whole universe. If she could've, she would have shared the story of your first girlfriend right away. Looks like I'm not the only jerk around here, Seamus. Even I wouldn't treat a girl like that. It was my turn to shrug. For once, he didn't have that sour look on his face. There could have been a little smile showing up. If you're going to do it, go all in. I shared with him the story of the ripped butcher paper from Stagnaro Brothers Meat and Seafood, plus the Hawthorne Street address I couldn't make out. The license number was. I grabbed my notebook, flipped to the right page, and read the number out loud. I wasn't totally sure, but those two mugs really reminded me of the shooters at the Roslyn. Bridges stood up and began to pace, then he stopped and looked right at me. So you're the guy Wolfson brought in to keep an eye on the trucks. He knew Wolfson? And that he got me on board? Now it was my chance to act like a fish flopping around. I don't think I'll ever get rich from playing poker. Come on, let's sit down, buddy, and I'll fill you in on what's happening. So we did, and he shared everything. Wolfson didn't lose a brother in Korea because he never had one. The business manager of the Long Beach local of the ILWU was Wolf's relative. He shared a request from Bridges to bring me on board to help tackle cargo losses. The idea to check out the beef was a bit of a gamble, they figured it had already been taken. I was a bit confused, always thinking about why they sometimes pick two sides and other times just one. How about? Who makes sure the trucks are loaded? Bridges seemed confused. Why? What does that even matter? I stayed quiet, just waiting for him to reply. A couple of guys are here. One's from the trucking company, and he has the list for each trailer, plus a union rep to keep an eye on things. I gave that some thought for a moment. The truck driver's job is probably to make sure there are enough sides loaded in each trailer, but how hard would it be to sneak in an extra side or two? He put the pieces together and saw the same picture I did. All they need to do is let the muscle know how many extra sides are in each trailer. When the shortfall finally appears, the heist could have taken place anywhere along the way, and the insurance company will cover the loss. Clever. The plan to raise the meat was kind of fun, but the killing at the Roslyn was not. What's the deal with the 3 guys who got shot at the Roslyn Hotel? All for what, 30 to 40 pounds of beef? Doesn't make sense. He shrugged once more. Who knows? If the people who did the shooting are the same ones who took the beef, maybe they thought too many small-timers were getting in on their action and wanted to send a message. What does it matter now? I didn't want to say that looking after the shooters could give Thomas Albright a sense of justice. And for me, too. I don't think so. If any of them were part of the union, they were doing their own thing. The ILWU doesn't steal or harm anyone. We might seem tough at times, but we're not criminals. I wasn't really sure, but arguing didn't seem worth it. He went on to say that he brought Wolfson in. He skipped over the part where I was involved, too, because he wanted to keep the stakeout under wraps in case any union members were mixed up in it. It seemed to me that he wasn't really convinced that some of his so-called brothers weren't up to no good. I walked away without saying he needed to fix his terrible security. I really wanted a drink after talking with Bridges, even if it was just some water and olives, so I made my way to the scupper. Laverne was happily drying glasses, making sure each one sparkled like crystal. I wondered why a girl like her would be interested in someone like me, but then I let it go before I got too caught up in it. She was pouring my second Fonatini when Wilkes hopped up onto the stool next to me. For a change, he popped the chewed-up cigar out of his mouth before he started talking. I saw your coupe parked out front. I thought you didn't drink? I don't. Try this, I said, offering him the martini glass. He wiggled his head side to side. No way, I don't kiss guys, even if they're good-looking like you. Laverne rolled her eyes, poured the last bit from the shaker into a clean glass, and handed it to him. No cooties on this one, champ. I wanted to tell her that Wilkes was a good guy, and we always joked around like that, but I really liked her calling me champ. Laverne had a knack for showing a guy who's boss. He glanced from the glass to her, then shrugged, grabbed the glass, gulped it down, and made a funny face. Wow! Is there any gin in this? It just tastes like plain water. I gave him a friendly slap on the back. Wow, you're fast, Wilkes. It's no surprise you're a detective lieutenant. I hoped this would clue Laverne in on who he was and that he was a buddy, well, the closest thing to a buddy I wanted. She chilled out, grabbed the glass again, and asked him what he wanted to drink. I gave it a shot to answer for him. He seems like someone who enjoys bourbon. Wilkes just shook his head. Nope, I grew up in the backwoods of Wisconsin. We didn't have mother's milk, we had beer and bratwurst. Bring me a Lucky. Laverne just stood there, staring him down. He picked it up fast. Here you go. She snatched a bottle of Lucky Lager from the cooler under the back bar, popped it open, and set it on a napkin right in front of him. The cigar was still in his hand, not between his lips. Thanks. She smiled and strolled back down the bar. I told Laverne to add his beer to my tab and pulled out a cigarette. When I popped open my Zippo, I realized things could get a bit mixed up. Hey, Wilkes. Next time you ask for a Lucky, you need to be clearer. This, I held up my Lucky Strike, is a Lucky, and that I pointed to his beer, is a Lucky, too. He didn't think it was great. Oh sure, it's so great to live in California. But I don't feel lucky at all when I'm handing over my hard-earned cash for those crazy income taxes. Ugh. Then he grinned. LS/MFT doesn't mean Lucky Strike/M. Eans fine tobacco, you know. He shoved the wet cigar back in his mouth. I smiled wide. No way. Loose straps/mean floppy tits. It's common knowledge. He pulled the cigar from his mouth once more and gave a sly grin. No way. Let's screw/my fingers tired. That's the adult take. Grown up, my foot. You two sound like a pair of 12-year-olds. Neither of us had seen Laverne sneak back in, leaning against the back bar. I felt really shy. Wilkes was just as impressive. I blurted out an apology, but Wilkes just crushed his cigar in the ashtray and got up. I gotta run. You could practically see him scurry away like a scared little puppy. After I said sorry a bunch of times, she finally smiled and confessed that being a bartender meant she'd heard those jokes before, but she still found them pretty funny. She was in such a great mood that when she asked, I happily went home with her. I've never been great at pillow talk, it feels like a breeze to spill my weaknesses. When she asked again about the bitch from Burbank, I tried to explain how freezing it was, shared a quick story about the retreat from Chosin to Hungnam, and told her that's why we called ourselves the Chosen Few. I really didn't want to chat about grabbing Cal's parka or how many guys I spotted at the retreat rocking 2 parkas or those quilted chicom jackets under their own. And there was no way I'd spill the beans about the dream to her or anyone else. I told her that thinking of my wife kept me going while Korea was trying to freeze me inside and out. I finally got her last letter almost 3 months after she sent it. Can you believe it? She managed to get a divorce in Reno without me around. Later, I discovered she was seeing a Marine pilot, but he got shipped out to Korea just a month later. I was curious if he had been zooming around in one of the Corsairs in my dream. The part that really took place. Laverne and I had talked a bunch of times about how we were just good friends, no strings attached. Even though she didn't say anything when I mentioned it was time to leave, I could sense she really wanted me to stay the night. I never brought her to my place because I was worried that once we were done having fun, she might not want to go home. I'd really have to push, and she'd feel pretty upset. This way hurt less. I could wrap it up simply by walking away. I drove home feeling pretty down, wishing for the millionth time that she actually meant it when she said no strings attached. Just 2 days later, Wolfson rang me up and said the cops busted into Stagnaro's. The owner and one of his workers got arrested. The worker finally came clean and said he was the one driving the truck with the stolen beef. The two who did all the hard work weren't around. Wolfson told me that Bridges mentioned 2 ILWU members had gone missing and that I should be careful. I promised him I would. It turned out that just wasn't enough. The next night, I was perched on my favorite stool at the scupper. As Laverne placed my second fake martini on the table, I spotted two tough guys in the mirror walking into the bar. I just had a feeling they were the ones behind the Roslyn shooting and stole the beef. Now they were chasing me. I was short on time, but I really needed to warn Laverne. Keep your eyes on mine. When I say now, turn right and duck down behind the bar. Quick! She went pale, but held my gaze. As she said okay with her lips, the first mug signaled the other to shift to our right and reached for his gun. Right now! I jumped to the left, pulled out the .45, and clicked off the safety. As I was falling, it barked twice, and the first thug went down. I clung to a bar stool to pull myself up and quickly took a shot out of sheer urgency. For a little while, I had some good luck. It hit the second shooter right in the face, but only after he had taken a shot. As I got up, I suddenly heard a slap and a gentle "oh" from Laverne. I turned just in time to see her stumbling back, blood spreading in the center of her chest. After a quick look to check if the goons were still down, I hurried over the bar. Laverne was lying on her back with one leg bent, and blood was spreading around her. I had seen death so many times that I figured she likely wasn't alive when she fell to the ground. I knelt next to her, gently moved her hair away from her face, closed her eyes with my thumb, straightened her leg, and pulled her skirt down a bit. It felt like doing those things really mattered. I knelt next to her, lifted her up in my arms, and held her still, my mind as empty as a dance card waiting for partners. A little while later, a couple of uniforms arrived. When they tried to grab her from me, I swatted their arms away. They paused, feeling a bit lost, until a friendly voice called out to them, and they stepped back. Wilkes dropped to his knees next to me. "You can let her go, Pete. She's gone." I turned to him but couldn't really see his face. "I get what you're thinking, but that's not it. You didn't do anything wrong. You got the guy who did it. And the other guy, too. They're both gone." He placed his hand on my arm but didn't try to shift it. "Let them take her. They'll look after her just fine." After a moment, I carefully laid her back down. Two ambulance attendants rolled her out of the bar. Wilkes and I got up and walked over to a table, feeling a bit stiff. He pulled out his notebook. "How did it happen?" I shared what I could recall, but I had to work hard to remember the details. Talking was tough. Once in a while, he'd check in to see how I was doing. I wanted him to believe everything was cool, so I'd just say fine. I didn't want anyone to feel sorry for me, not even this cop who felt more like a friend than anyone else I knew. When he said he was all out of questions, I asked if I could head out. He nodded and said I might need to answer more questions later. Death has a scent that isn't about blood or rotting things. It's a scent of giggles never giggled and wishes never wished. I was super tired of that awful smell of death. As I drove back to my apartment, I couldn't help but think about all the losses that had touched my life. It all began with Laverne, sweet Laverne, whose only mistake was caring about me. Then the thug who shot her and his buddy, the same guys who blasted the hotel butcher and the two small-time crooks. It just kept going. The two guys who had scared Lupe and her daughter last year, the unfortunate dude whose wife got me to check if he was being unfaithful, the same wife who was also playing around, the guy she was seeing on the side. I got back to Burbank without remembering the trip at all, but I'm glad I made it in one piece. When I swung open the door to my apartment, I couldn't help but think about all the Chicams who went down to my Madus. Right when I was about to add all the fallen Chicams in my dream who had come back to life, the phone rang. I wasn't in the mood to chat and almost let the phone ring, but I thought it might be Bridges calling to cheer me on for taking out those two goons and bragging about how great the ILWU really is. I chose to tell him to take a hike. Absolutely. "Hey, Pete?" When I heard her voice, it knocked the wind out of me, and I plopped down into a kitchen chair. I just couldn't come up with anything to say. "Hey, Pete? Hey, are you still around? Lupe? Hey, how have you been? We've been super busy, but guess what? We're back in Los Angeles." Ileana and I are crashing at my cousin's place until I find somewhere to live. I heard you still haven't found a secretary. Is it possible for me to apply for the job? She sounded so happy, almost bubbly. I wasn't prepared for this and hadn't figured out what to say. I pictured her back in my life, running the office and making every day feel sunny. I didn't know how much I had missed her or how big the gap was without her. Then, out of nowhere, my thoughts drifted back to all those I had lost. I answered right away, worried I might rethink it. No, Lupe. You have to keep your distance from me. I squeezed my eyes shut until they ached. I'm the angel of death. Before she could say anything, I ended the call. I grabbed the phone again to check for a dial tone, then set it down sideways on the cradle so she couldn't call back. I poured myself a cup of cold coffee, lit up a Lucky, and plopped down at the kitchen table, wondering if there was a better way to earn a living.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you for your time. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I'll see you there.